In this video, I'm going to cover 5 important concepts about JavaScript that you should grasp as a beginner. JavaScript can definitely be overwhelming with, all the different types of things you can learn. And I wanted to create this little tutorial to point you in the right direction with, what you should start learning at the beginning. And then, in later videos, I'll go into more advanced topics. But without further ado, we can get started. In Visual Studio Code, I've created a folder with 2 files, one index.html file, and that's just boilerplate. All I did was shift, ! tab, and then I added the script to the file, within the body, and that links up with the other file, which is script.js, and within it I have 5 examples that I'm going to go over today of different things you should know as a beginner. Now, the first example I want to talk about is it's really important to know variables. Variables are used quite frequently in JavaScript, and you're going to be needing to use them. A variable is essentially a way to store some data. And so in this example, you'll see it here. Let favorite food equals pizza. Pizza is being stored in this variable that we created, and then we're console.logging this in the browser. So you can think of a variable almost like a jar, a labeled jar that you can put things into, you can take things out of, or replace what's inside. So it gives you kind of just a little idea of what a variable is. And the idea with variables, it's a place to store data so you can change it or use it later. So you can declare them with let, const, or var. You'll see that in this example with let. You can use const, and you can use var. Var is a more dated, one of the original ways to declare variables. Now it's not as used as often. You should use let or const. And the reason is, let is for variables or data that you're planning on changing later, and const is keeping the value the same. So those are the two that you can use. It gives a bit more a more specificity compared to using var. And it's going to keep your code organized and reusable with these variables, so you don't have to repeat yourself. You can just reuse variables. So I have this example. I've already kind of touched on it, and we're doing 2 things. We're declaring the variable, like I mentioned, we're assigning it to a value, and then we're having it show up in the browser, in the console more specifically. And then further down, we are reassigning that variable, and we're reassigning it to a string with burger, and then we're console.logging that in the browser again, or in the console again more specifically. So that's the example we're doing, and this console.log is console is an object and log is a method, and a method is essentially almost like a function, if we want to just simplify it, that allows you to do some sort of action. And we're saying, hey, with this log function, this method, we want to display the variable in the browser, in the console. And so if we go to the console, which is going to the dev tools here, if we go to the console, you will see pizza, and then you will see burger, and that's running from this script file that we are running in our local device right here. So that's example 1. You notice that it's not showing up in the browser. There's nothing. It's just in the actual page itself. There's nothing there. We're just displaying this on more of the underneath layer, you can say, in the console, this section here. Perfect. Now, the next example, in addition to variables, you've got functions. And I want to go ahead and take this example and bring it out so we can talk about it. So in example 2, we have functions. So another thing as a beginner you should learn to know is not only variables but also functions. Functions are those actions. So if it's associated to an object, it's more than likely going to be called in a method. But methods and functions in a lot of ways can be very similar. They're actions that you can do to perform. So to give you a better sense of what a function is, you can think of it as like a vending machine. So with a vending machine, you're pressing a button, you're entering an input or a code for a candy bar, a drink, and that's your input in the vending machine, and it's going to give you that snack or drink back as an output. So with that vending machine, you can press different buttons to get different results. You can enter a different input, but the machine or the vending machine is still going to work the same each time. So that vending machine you can think of as a function. where you enter an input, which is name, and you're going to get a different output. And so this is that example, which we're going to go into a bit more. Functions let you group code into reusable blocks. You can give them inputs, like I talked about, and they can return outputs. Inputs are known as parameters, so this name is a parameter. And, this makes your code, both cleaner and easier to manage. Functions are central to writing, dry code. So this idea of dry code is not repeating yourself. So here we could say, let's say you had, in this example, let's say you wanted to, you have a classroom with students, you want to say hi to every student in the classroom, and, you want to think of the console as the way to deliver that message to the student. And so we can say, hey, we're like, oh, console, we can just, comment this out, and we can just say, hey, console.log, and we can say, hi, Paul, right? And we'll see hi, Paul in the browser. We can then go console.log, hi, Jake, and then we can do that again. And we can keep going with this. We can say console.log, hi, Alex. And you can see what happens is this starts to get a bit repetitive. And so you'll see that you can do this over and over, but with functions, you're able to eliminate all of this extra code and make it a bit cleaner with a function. And so that's what we're doing in example 2. We've got a function. You name a function by first declaring it as a function. Then you give it a name. We're calling it the greet function to our students. We give it a name. And then to write out a function, the action itself, you got to put it between curly braces, like so. And so within the curly braces, we're saying, hey, in the console, our way of communicating with our students, we want to say hello plus the name, which is the parameter, and then an exclamation mark. Now, down below, we're going to call this function, or what known as calling. We're going to say, hey, greet, and within greet, we're going to enter an argument. An argument is, replacing that parameter. The parameter is name, and the argument that we want to use is Alex. And then the next, we're going to call it again and say Thomas. And so we'll see that in the browser. Hello, Alex. Hello, Thomas. And so it allows us to give a different input, a different argument, and get a different output, but run the same function. So it's the same action, it's just a different input, and then it's going to deliver a different output because of that. So that is functions. That's just a brief overview of that function. We talked about variables, we talked about functions. The next one I want to talk about is objects. So JavaScript is object-oriented programming. You may have heard of that when you hear about JavaScript. And you could think of objects as backpacks almost, a backpack where it holds a lot of items with labels on them. And each label for each item in the backpack points, to a different item. So in your backpack at school, you can say you have, a water bottle, you have a notebook, you have a snack. You could have all these items, pencils, all these items in your backpack, and, you want to, remember them by putting a little label on it. And that's the idea of an object. And so we can look at this next example to get a better idea of what's going on. So with objects, you're starting to get into more of the cool stuff about JavaScript, the more advanced stuff. With objects here, you are giving more complex data. So earlier with variables, we've got like strings. You can assign a variable to a number. You can assign a variable to all sorts of things. And with an object, you're now starting to get into more complex data that has more, more meaning to us as humans in a way. So here, you'll see I'm creating a variable, just like earlier, let, followed by the name. And then I'm within curly braces, I'm creating an object. So an object is, consisting of curly braces and then key value pairs that you're seeing here about this student that I'm creating. So I've just decided to create this student. His name is Jordan. He's age 14. He's in the 9th grade. And then I'm console.logging that data in the browser. So with objects, before we get to the solution, I want to just mention, objects are letting you store multiple related values together using key value pairs. I touched on that. They're useful for making complex data. We talked about that. And you can access these properties within the object using dot or bracket notation, and that's what's down below here. Objects are used all the time in JavaScript, and you can use this to create characters, keep track of students like we're doing here, create like user profiles, all of that type of stuff. That's what an object can be. You can have an object for an automobile, an object for pretty much anything you can think of in the real world. You're now putting it into code with an object. And so here we are saying, show this in the browser. We want to show some data about the student. Here we're doing dot notation. So to access data within the object, we have to follow it with the name of the object, student, or the variable, and then followed by the dot, and then followed by the key. The key of name gets back the value, Jordan. And then here we have the object student. We are accessing the data with bracket notation instead. So just two ways of doing it. Bracket notation instead, and we're saying, hey, let's give me back the grade. And we're referencing it, the key with the actual quotes, wrapping the string, and putting grade. So those are the two ways, and we'll see in the browser Jordan and 9th as the 9th grade. So that's number 3, objects, variables, functions, objects. Let's go to number 4. And with number 4, I want to get into this idea of arrays. And with arrays, you can think of an array as like a row of lockers. So with an array, as a locker, each locker has a number and it holds something. And within, each locker, you can get what's in the locker, or you can change and swap something out of the locker and put something else in by knowing, the location, the number of the locker. You can swap something out. And that's, the kind of the same idea for an array. An array stores lists of items in order, as we're seeing here. Each item has an index starting at 0. It doesn't start at 1. It starts at 0. You can add, remove, and access items by their position. And arrays are, essential for managing collections of data like scores, names, or settings. And really anything that you want a collection of, you can put it in an array. So in this example, what we're seeing here is again a variable, which we talked about earlier. We're using let, and we're assigning it. So this equal sign in mathematics is an equal sign, but in programming it's going to be an assignment. We're assigning it to this array, and an array is denoted by the closing brackets, the opening and closing bracket here. So not a curly brace, but a bracket. And then within the brackets, we are creating a list of something. It can be numbers, it can be strings, it can be really anything. And in this case, we've just done a list of colors that we want. So a list of strings with the names of colors. And then in the browser, we want to, let everyone know about this color. It's our way of communicating to the world in a way, console. We're saying, hey, we want to log this in the console, the color 0, which is the color red. So I mentioned earlier that arrays start at 0. So we got 0, position 1, position 2. And like those lockers, we can access the first locker, the second locker, and the third locker. And so color 0 gets back red. This next line, colors.push, we're going to be adding to our lockers. Let's say we want to, we have another extra locker that's available. We want to add that locker to our collection. And so we're pushing. So this .push is going to add yellow to the very end of our array. And so here, console.log, we're going to show all the colors, and that's going to be red, blue, green, and yellow. And so we'll see that. We first got red. If we want to access one of our lockers, one of the positions in the array, we've done that with red, and then we've pushed yellow to the back of the array. And so you'll see that here, red, blue, green, yellow. And so arrays are going to be really, really helpful for storing and organizing a list of data. An array can be helpful. For instance, let's say you have a website, you have a blog, and you have a featured section in the blog. You want to, showcase certain aspects of your blog post. And in that featured array, you could have a featured array of the blogs that you access from your database, whether that's like a cloud database like Supabase. And, you can use an array to just get those. You specify which blog posts you want to showcase in that featured blog widget that you have. And so that's the idea of arrays is, you can have collections of things that you want to, then use in some way. Great. Now, the final example is this one right here, and that's going to be conditionals. With conditionals allow you to make decisions based on certain situations. And, you could think of this like a road sign, for instance. If you see a road sign, it's going to tell you based on, certain conditions, you can, go a certain way. So, think of a train that has like a sign that says, you have to go left or right, or a car with a stop sign. So these certain conditions that you see direct you in a certain way. And in the same way with programming, with conditionals, it allows you more flexibility to have different options. So if one thing happens, do this. If another thing happens, do that. That's essentially what we're doing with conditionals. Now, to set up a conditional, you're using if and else. And then between, you're also using else if. So we have here, to start a conditional, you're always starting with if. And then after the if or the else or anything else if, you want to do parentheses and specify like if this situation happens. So if a situation happens in the parentheses, do this. Else, if another situation happens in parentheses, do that. And then finally, the final else is if all else fails, do this situation. And so there's no need to put a parentheses in another situation because it's just the fallback fail-safe solution that you want to run in case none of the above instances happen. And so we'll see that here in this example. We've got a variable declared with let assigned to a value of 85. So someone scored a B, an average B in the class, and we're saying if the score is an A or higher, so a 90 or higher, give them a grade of A. And in this case, to give that grade of A, we're just showing it in the console, like so. Console.log grade A. Else, if the score is greater than or equal to 80, then we want to show, hey, they got a B. And then finally, if they haven't scored an A or a B, we're saying, hey, if all else, we're saying they got a C or below. We don't want to really get into D or F. It's just failing at that point. So we're just saying C or below. Show that in the browser as a way of letting the student know that they got a C or lower. And so in this case, since the score is 85, if we go to the browser, we're going to see that they got a grade of B. So those are 5 beginner things you should start to learn with JavaScript. To cover them again, we have variables. You should learn functions. You should learn about objects. Arrays and conditionals are really good places to start as a beginner. And in later videos, we're going to go into more complex topics. I'm also planning on having some more exercises to start learning this and getting more comfortable with these situations. But that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed and have a great rest of your day. Take care.